Hi, my name's Kate. I'm the editor of Knit Now magazine, and I'm just here to give you a little bit of advice, hints and tips for sewing up your very own Shaun the Sheep. Now, you'll find the pattern to knit Shaun in issue 91, which is this one. You can see him in the top corner here. The pattern is in the magazine, like I say. It's in the digital edition as well as the print edition. So I'll leave you all of those links so that you can find the magazine. So once you've knitted all of your pieces, you'll have a pile that looks like this, and you'll just need a couple of other bits. You will of course need some toy stuffing. This is what we use, just really standard polyester toy stuffing. You will need, of course, a pair of scissors, and I recommend investing in a set of these. These are large-eyed wool needles, and what you can see with these ones is they've got this really big loop at the top here, so you can use these with really super chunky yarn, because Shaun himself, as you can see, he's quite large, but he's a quick knit because he uses really super chunky yarn. But that does mean that your standard wool needles might struggle with that yarn. So this little set from Knit Pro, it'll only set you back a couple of quid. Really good investment and really useful for sewing up your Shaun. So shall we get into it? So here we are with all our bits and pieces. We have got the front and back of the head, the legs, the body, the tail, our stuffing, eyes, the top of the head, the ears, and some of our plain yarn for sewing up. The first thing you'll notice is that we don't have any of the funny yummy for sewing up. This is because I found it was much easier to do all of the sewing up with the plain yarns. You can sew up with the funny yummy. If you're going to do that, there's a really clever little trick. So you can see the funny yummy has these lovely like fluffy bobbly bits on it, which is what gives you that great Shaun body texture. But if you just give it a pull, those disappear. So you can get a sort of more straight, smooth yarn from the funny yummy by just pulling out those loops. But like I say, I found it easier to just use the Big Value Super Chunky for all of the sewing up. So let's start with the body. The body is your biggest piece. It's knitted in one big piece that's then folded over to get you Shaun's long, quite a square, sort of rectangular shaped body he has actually, which you probably don't realise until you go to make him. So all I'm doing is I'm just going to tuck the ends inside, and for the body, at first we sew along the bottom and along the side. And like I say, I'm going to use the Big Value Super Chunky for this. So I'll just cut off a length. So you don't want to be working with too long a piece of yarn when you're sewing up. I'd say sort of a metre or so, not too long. So you will, with a big piece like this, you will have two pieces of yarn, but let's just snip that yarn and pop those scissors to the side. Pop the yarn to the side. Like I said before, I use these wool needles from Knit Pro. So because the eye is lovely and big, you can put even super chunky yarn through it really easily, like that. So we start at one corner. I'd start here. So you need to secure the yarn on the wrong side, so we need to find out which one's the right side and the wrong side. It looks pretty similar in this yarn, I'm not going to lie, but one side will be slightly fluffier than the other, and that will be the side where your purl bumps are. So in this yarn you can just work in what's known as garter stitch, which is where you knit every row. But when I was playing around with it, when I was designing Shaun, I found that if you knit in stocking stitch, which is alternate knit rows and purl rows, what you end up with is one side where all the purl bumps are is a little bit fluffier, and if we can get any more fluffy, then we can. So you probably can't see on camera, but I can feel where I am, that this is the knit side and this is the purl side. What I'd recommend is popping a label in the yarn when you're knitting it, so that when you come to sew up, you can tell. So I've found the center where my side seam is going to be. So I'm just going to secure the yarn on the wrong side here. Now the great thing about Funny Yummy I found as well is that because there's all these loops, you can sort of use those for your own ends, where you can use them to just secure your yarn on the wrong side like this. So just sew in and out of a couple of them until your yarn doesn't move when you tug it. So that's nice and secure on the inside there. So I'm going to find the center, and that's where I'm going to come through on the outside here. And again, I'm going to cheat a little bit. When we come to the other pieces, I'll show you how I normally do my seams. But with the Funny Yummy, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to use the loops. So as you can see, there's lots of these little loops running all the way down here. And with your needle, if you just find one loop from this side, one loop from that side, one loop from this side, one loop from that side, all the way along, you will find that you get a really nice neat seam. Honestly, it feels like cheating, but in this particular yarn, it works. It's not going to work in every yarn, but I've done the experimenting for you, so you don't have to. In this yarn, you can just pick a loop from one side of the seam, pick another loop from the other side, pick a loop. As you go along, make sure your seam is laying flat and even. Pick a loop, and then when you pull your yarn through, like that, you'll see you've got an almost invisible seam there. So I'm going to carry on doing this and I'll speed it up so you don't have to sit through me talking all the way. And that's it. That's your body all sewn up. I'm going to pop this to the side for now and do the other pieces just the same. So this is your body, the long thin bit. Shaun's tail, when you've knitted it, will look like this. So again, it's in one piece, so you just fold it over with the smaller part at the top and the wider part at the bottom, and these are the curved edges of his tail. And just like we did for the body, we sew along here and up here, and we'll leave the top open for stuffing. So let me get another piece of yarn and I'll get going. And that's your tail. So again, you can see that seam disappears to nothing. You've got a little pocket here that you can stuff, and you've got two pieces made up. The top of the head you do in exactly the same way. This is what it looks like when it's finished. It looks like a sort of C shape, but again, you fold it over, so along that short edge and that little side piece there, and that becomes the top of the head. Right, so those are your three pieces in Funny Yummy in that pile over there. Next up, you move to the pieces that you've knitted in the Big Value Super Chunky. So you've got your head pieces, which will look something like this. I really recommend, because these two look quite similar, pop a little stitch marker with a note. So you can see this one says back. This is actually a stitch marker that we gave away with Crochet Now a couple of issues ago. So you can pin it in just with a note on it. So if you don't do that, you can tell the difference because the front is slightly wider than the back, but they do look quite similar. So what you need to do next, let me just demark that. You take your Big Value Super Chunky in black and cut off a length of this. And we're gonna sew around these edges, front to back, using what's known as mattress stitch. Now, it's gonna be really hard for you to see exactly what I'm doing in this because this is black, but I will try my very best to explain as I go along. So, once again, secure your yarn on the wrong side before you start working. Just a couple of stitches on the wrong side of the work, and the wrong side in this is the purl bump side because Shaun's face is smoother than his body, so just a couple of little stitches on the wrong side there. And then bring it through to the right side. So if I lay these out flat, you'll be able to see what's going on. So we've got the front and the back here, and they're going to be joined along the edge using mattress stitch. Now, mattress stitch is a super easy stitch where you just go through one side and then the other. So I'm going to start it here with one little stitch to bring them together. And then what you want to do is if you pull this apart a little bit, you'll start to see there's a bit of a ladder that runs up the inside edge of the work. So for each stitch, you go through one of these ladders and you do one on the right and then you match it to one on the left, like that. So through the little ladder on the right and through on the left. And after you've done a few stitches, I'm just going to do one more, paying attention all the way around that you're keeping your sides even. So sometimes you'll need to have a longer gap between stitches on one side than the other to keep everything lined up. Then once you've done a few, you just pull the yarn and that zips the two sides together so you get a really neat edge. I'm aware that that's hard to see in the black, so I will link to a tutorial on our website as well, just in case you need some extra help. So I'm going to go all the way around Shaun's head now. Oh, I've got bits of yarn going everywhere. The next bit to come to, ooh, there we go. Next bit to come to is his arms and legs. Now these pieces are all exactly the same. You'll see there's like a long tubey bit and a more rounded end. That's going to be his hands and feet. And with this, you don't need a separate piece of yarn to start with. You use the yarn that you pulled through at the end when you cast off. Pop that onto your needle and you sew using mattress stitch exactly the same as you did for the head. You don't need to secure it because it's already part of your knitting, but at this point you're literally just going to sew up the foot or the hand, depending whether it's where it's going to get sewn to. Like this. That's your foot all sewn up, seam pulled nice and tight to zip those stitches together. And you can see there's a little round foot here. Now, when you do your feet, you have them all at the same stage at the same time. And to make sure your feet are all the same size, take your stuffing, fluff it up a little bit, and get 4 equally sized handfuls. I would go literally grab a hand and do this much, but do the same for each one. So grab a handful, so you can see these are coming out all the same size. That's why you do them all at the same time so that you can check. So handful, 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 put the leftovers there. Do I think these are all about the same size? Give that one a squish, give that one a squish. This one, this one. This one's looking a little bit bigger than the others to me, so I'll just get rid of a little bit of the fluff there, so that I know I've got all, I'm going to have all evenly sized limbs. So I'll pop these 3 just over here for now, and then I will stuff this, oh, wrong one. So I will stuff this one with one of these balls of stuffing for a foot, give it a little squidge around, and then rethread the yarn and carry on sewing up the leg. So that will be all 4 arms and legs done. So now you've just got one more bit of seaming to do, and that's his eyes. Now, they're only little, so what I did was just stuffed the yarn inside, and I used the tail ends from actually knitting the eyes to sew them up. So just but match the yarn, so do a couple of stitches in the black here for his pupil, just a couple, because you only did a couple of rows to knit the pupil, and then stuff that yarn inside, hide it away. If you've got a lot of yarn ends, you're not going to need any stuffing, but then with the cream, carry on sewing that seam here. Fasten it off there. You don't need to sew this, which was your cast on edge, you don't need to worry about that. So just leave this bit of yarn for later, because you can use that to attach the eye to the head. So that's what your eye looks like when it's finished. So you do that for both of them. The ears don't need any seaming at all, just leave them, and then we move on to pulling all of the pieces together. So I've just taken a minute now to finish all the sewing up, all those little odds and ends, and now we have our finished eyes and ears, our head, our body, tail and top of head, and our legs and arms over here. Oh, I'm crunching. I'll just cut that out, it's fine. So I'm going to start now with the body and giving it a bit of a stuff. So that's the top of the head, that's the tail. This big long piece, remember, is the body. And I've got some stuffing over here. I'm going to take a bit of this. The best thing to do is to take as big a piece as you can, because you don't want it to end up too bitty. I'm going to just guesstimate how much I need. I find it's generally better to overstuff and then pull it out than to understuff and then stuff more in, because that's when you end up getting sort of uneven shapes and things like that. So just leave the rest of my stuffing there. So I'm going to go about there. I'm just going to sort of fold this up and stuff it in. Like I say, with the body, you don't want to overstuff this, because he is quite soft and fluffy and floppy, good for bedtime snuggles. And because this yarn is sort of loopy, it fills in the gaps between your stitches, and it gives you a really nice sort of soft squidgy finish. So I think that's good there. I'll just take a minute to just push out the stuffing to the corners, because when you look at Shaun, you don't realise it if you're just glancing at him, but he is quite square in the body, at the corners. So that's the body stuffed there, and then I'm going to sew up this open top edge again, the same as I did along the side, using the Big Value Super Chunky rather than using the Funny Yummy. So that's our lovely fluffy body. The head, you have two pieces. So this is the face section, and for the top of his head you've got a bit of the Funny Yummy, which is that shape. And for this section, I sewed mine together using the black yarn, and you need to do a sort of a combination of a mattress stitch really, with catching the yarn into your Funny Yummy. So same as we've done before, thread your yarn, anchor it on the wrong side. So I'm just going to stuff these little ends away. So anchor it on the wrong side with a couple of stitches in there. And then you want to line up this top of the head with the face. So I'm going to go through a stitch sideways at the top of the head. So go that way through. And then match that with inside of this top of the head section. I'm just going to catch a couple of these loops from the Funny Yummy, and then again across a top stitch here. And I'm just going to do half of this head and then we'll stuff. So that's half of the top of the head sewn on, and as you can see, the Funny Yummy is sitting sort of overlapping the black face section. So next up is to give this a bit of a stuff. You can stuff the head more firmly than you did the body. So let's go back to our stuffing. Same principle again, go for try and get this in one lump if you can. So, and then just go back to sew the rest of the way around the top of the head. So that's Shaun's head all made up. When you look at yours, you'll see that the side seam will sit slightly to the back. So that's how you can tell your back from your front, is that basically there's more face in the front and the back is a bit more flat. So again, just secure this end, a couple of stitches, and then hide it inside the knitting. So a good thing about toys is when you're making a garment, the inside of the garment will still be open to the elements, but with a toy, the inside, you can hide your ends in there and you don't have to fully weave them in. So while we're still on the face, I'm going to flip him back over to the bit that I think starts to make him Shaun, which is adding his ears and eyes. Now the ears are here. You'll see they come to a point at one end, So that's the end of the ear, and this shorter, flatter bit, that's the bit that goes against the head. So I've still got some yarn left on this needle. I only need a few stitches. So take the side of the head and find that side seam, and you line up your ear with that side seam so that the ear sits exactly on the side seam. And then, like we've done before, a couple of stitches to secure, from here. Again, I found working sideways into a stitch rather than up and down, and then match that with a stitch at the top of the head. So your tension on your ears and your the black sections of your head are the same, so you can match exactly stitch to stitch. And you just need 4 or 5 stitches along here to secure the ears. So that's one ear. Obviously we've got this little tail that we'll have to weave in at the end. So anything that is exposed, so the ends of your ears, you will need to weave those ends in. I'll show you that after I've sewn on the other ear. Here he is with his ears. So we've got one either side and they stick straight out. So you can see we've got some little ends here, ends at the ends of the ears, and all you need to do is thread those onto a needle and sew a few stitches on the inside of the ear to secure it, and then cut it off. So here's the inside of the ear. I'm just going to go from the end in and out a few times here. Oops, pull the yarn through. Obviously without wanting to pull it out of shape, and then go back on yourself. To be extra secure, you can split into the yarn that you've just sewn through, just a couple of stitches. And then trim it off like so. And then you do that for the other side, and for any yarns that you have at the beginning here, just a couple of stitches and into the head. So I'm going to do that for the other ear. So I've got a flatter back here, it's more curved at the front, so that's where my eyes are going to go. So make sure he's nicely squidged into shape, and you take your eyes. Now I didn't stuff these because I tried stuffing them and they started looking weird, but there's enough bounce in them that you don't need to. So make sure they're straight. You can play around with them. You might want to use a pin to pin them in place. So if I take this eye, I'm just using my other wool needle. So if I think, oh, where do I want them to be? You want them quite close together for Shaun, but not too close. They still want to be round. So if I say, right, I want them there, this feels really mean, stick a pin in that one. And then with black yarn again, and holding him in place, I'm going to secure my yarn behind his eye, the same as we've secured all of our yarns before. So one stitch, and then another stitch straight on top of that. Give it a tug to feel that it's secure. And then you're going to do a variation of mattress stitch, which is what we did on the legs and around the head, but sideways. So similar to what we did at the top of the head. So you go in sideways into one of the eye stitches. So it'll look like a little V. You go sideways into that. And then you match that with a stitch on the head itself. So you're doing this at the back of the eye so that when the eye sits normally, you don't see these stitches. So these are sort of hidden from view just underneath. And you go all the way around both eyes doing that. So there we have a head with eyes on. I'm just going to hide this little end inside it. So I've already hidden the other end in. Pull that through. Give it a squidge about. Remember, he's malleable, he's squidgeable. If you see something that doesn't quite look right, you can play with it till it does. And just snip these ends off the back here. So we have got a head, a body, 4 limbs here. It's just the tail left to stuff and sew up, and then we sew it all together. And I'm going to leave that bit of yarn there because I'm going to use it to sew the tail onto the body. So if we assemble all of the pieces, so I'm going to sew the tail to the body here, the head to the top of the body, and then I'm going to do all of the limbs, and then we're going to have a finished Shaun. So the tail and body, like I said, I've left that on there, so I'm going to sew that just using the white yarn. The head and the limbs I'll sew on using the black yarn. So what you want to do is have the head slightly overlapping onto the body, so you see like this, and you want to do a line of stitches across here and then round and underneath. Very similar kind of principle to what you did for the eyes. Snip those ends off. So all that's left now are his limbs. These, we've left a bit of a tail, so you don't necessarily need to join in new yarn. Just hide one of them inside. So I just did that and just stuff it inside like that, and then you can thread this and sew on all of the limbs to all 4 corners of his body, just like you sewed the head on, just like you sewed the tail on. Easy peasy. And here we have your very own finished Shaun the Sheep, ready for snuggling. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. Do let us know what you think, and don't forget to pick up your copy of issue 91 of Knit Now magazine to knit your very own Shaun the Sheep. Bye.